So today we'll be discussing how and when do fetuses gather enough brain matter to be considered capable of developing a sense of self. My name's Elizabeth Cito.
I'm Phoenix.
I'm Ethan.
I'm Jacob.
I'm Trinity Lee.
John.
And I'm Prabhat.
So before we start, we recognize that we all have our personal biases that come from experience. However, as a group, we put our personal biases aside so that we can come to the most logical conclusions. So recently, the overturning of Roe v. Wade explored how fetuses gather enough brain matter to be capable of developing their sense of self. We researched the different neurological technologies that were able to dive deeper into how this is possible.
Before we even start with ethical questions, first we have to define a couple things. So first, our group decided that we would come up with an original definition of the sense of self based on the ethical brain. The self we have defined as one's individuality that is constantly evolving throughout one's lifetime and developed through experiences. However, this is very different from just existing as it's just the continuation of surviving, which is just performing bodily functions. Consciousness and self go together hand in hand. Consciousness can be defined as the sensory awareness of the body, the self, and the world, and normally in response to a stimulus.
So DMN stands for Default Mode Network. And what is the DMN? They may be where the sense of self lies, according to a study that was conducted this year by Dr. Joseph Parvizi, where he used electrical signals on different areas of the brain to determine where our sense of self stems from.
Based on his study, we can come to two possibilities, one of which is that the fetus's encounters with sensory stimulation equates to life experience, and we can use this to track the PMN development and deduce that that is where the fetal self-awareness develops. And this means that in this study, the results from the fetus can be applicable. That results can be applicable. And the other possibility is that there is not the fetus's encounters with sensory stimulation is not enough in comparison to the fully developed brain of other subjects, and this research can't be applied in this situation. However, whether or not the fetus is capable of being a part of the study, we are uncertain about whether or not the DMN generates our consciousness or our experience generates our consciousness, which creates a chicken or the egg debate.
So currently we have fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, which we have learned previously through this week. It's an up and coming for detecting fetal brain development and has been able to read pre and postnatal brain activity. And as we have explored this week, we can see that personhood is more as a potential and self is more of focused in the now. Movement can cause a lot of problems with data analysis and interpretation, which can be difficult because fetuses and babies like to move a lot. And based on our research, when preterm babies are born, neurologists can study in the baby's brain to determine when their brain would look like what it's still in the womb. So if a mother delivers a child that is preterm, let's say like 27 weeks, we can infer that the 27-week-old brain would look the same as it would look in the womb.
So we looked at a variety of research topics and research scenarios, and what we found really stunned us. For example, the cortex ideology. And the cortex ideology correlates to self-consciousness and self-awareness. And that's the same thing with the global network theory. The global network theory also covers the same thing, self-consciousness and self-awareness. But instead of being more specialized, it's within those four lobes, the four lobes that make up our brain. And then our next slide correlates to the APC, or the precuneus. And what the precuneus really does, it's kind of like a combination of the both. It correlates to how the cortex works and how the global network theory also works. And it still focuses on that self-consciousness aspect and that self awareness aspect as well. And that's really what makes up our mind. And because we can't really decide which theory that we have to choose, we can compare the similarities and contrast them as well.
So as technology it evolves in medicine and new technologies are constantly being made, it is important to address the question of if and when the fetus gains the sense of self. So when we do find the answer to this, the knowledge we gain will have major ethical, legal, and social implications. So focusing on the ethical implications, many challenges will arise. So first one being, should the mother's decision overrule the potentiality of the fetus if the fetus does have self? Second point being, should we perform medical procedures on the fetus if the fetus does have the sense of self, and if the procedures do affect the sense of self in the fetus, how will that negative affect the fetus as it starts to develop? And then the third one being, should we give the fetus rights while it is in the womb? Because if it has the sense of self, and then these questions must be answered as we gain more knowledge and new technologies are being made. When addressing legal limitations, it's crucial to modify the laws and legislations currently being made or currently that are in action to relate to the new knowledge and that we're gaining from research. And this knowledge can help change the ideals and ideas of many politicians and countries and states in the US. Then going back to Roe v. Wade, the new information we can gain will prove this ruling as unlawful.
So on the topic of sense of self and abortion, we can't really have one definition or one conclusion, as we can't go to one conclusion, as this will create more discourse or disagreement among society. However, most people agree on proven facts. So if we can prove the presence of self in the fetus, neuroscience could become like a baseline for the ethicality of abortion. And finally, we must determine whether or not we can live in a society where there is a blurred line between a fetus just existing and living with a developed concept of self as a defining factor in what we do with our bodies and the future of fetuses.
So on to developing and future technology for helping to solve this discussion. Magnetoencephalography is a process that was developed about 50 years ago by a physicist named David Cohen. And it basically relies on the principle that all brain cells are active, and active cells produce electricity, which in turn produce magnetic fields. And an MEG device detects minute changes in these magnetic fields and relays that information back to a machine learning classifier that organizes the data. So fetal MEGs are a pretty new development in the MEG field, and they are being pretty much pioneered by the University of Arkansas. But these MEGs are the only existing non-invasive technique for investigating fetal brain activity, and the machines have rapidly developed over the past 50 years. And so this gives them an excellent starting platform from which to build off of in the future. But this technology could theoretically lead us to how and when fetal self-awareness develops through monitoring brain activity and analyzing response to stimuli in specific regions of the brain, such as the previously mentioned DMN. But it is definitely important to note that, as we all know, neuroscience is constantly evolving, and so we can only speculate as to how far our current technologies will take us.
Okay, so now moving on to the conclusion, we will address if there's an answer to how and when a fetus can develop a sense of self. So first off, how? How exactly does a fetus come up with a notion of self? Well, we define that the self, according to Michael Gazzaniga's The Ethical Brain, is generated and developed by the experiences and our ability to process these such experiences. Using this definition, we can infer that fetuses technically do have a sense of self because of the unique non-reflexive reactions that they have to stimuli. However, in Dr. Parvizi's research, it revealed that self is limited to simply the DMN, providing an alternate explanation of where the self can come from. However, both of these have limits because number one, the definition of self cannot be generalized for everyone. So our interpretation that experiences form our self is specific to our study. Number two, Parvizi's experiment is conducted on non-fetuses. This can raise doubts due to the cognitive differences between the fetus and also the subjects of the study who have experienced developmental stages. Furthermore, between Parvizi and Gazzaniga's depiction of a self, we can't really assess which of the latter really generates self. Is it experience that creates self and the DMN that helps to maintain it? Or is it the other way around? Is it the DMN that creates our innate self and our covert consciousness while experiences refine it? We have no answer. Now, let's focus on when exactly do fetuses gain self-consciousness? Well, to be honest, without a definite answer to how, we can't really have an answer to when as well. The limitations and our generalization of the definition of self doesn't really allow us to pinpoint exactly when fetuses are capable of forming the notion of self. However, we do have one thing that we know for sure. Because synapses do not form for fetuses until 17 weeks in the gestational process, fetuses have no self in this time frame because synapses, the very source of our brain function, simply do not exist. And thank you so much to all the amazing professors who have helped guide us along this way and to our team leader as well. Thank you.